live in a world obsessed with overnight success stories, where tech entrepreneurs become billionaires in clean, air-conditioned offices, but no one talks about the grit it takes for a woman to break into an industry ruled by grease, iron, and old-school machismo. My name is Elena. 10 years ago, my entire net worth was exactly $300, a cracked smartphone, and a cheap laptop. I didn't have a fleet of trucks or a fancy warehouse. All I had was a desperate need to survive and a wild idea to disrupt the heavy freight brokerage market. Everyone in the industry laughed at me. They said logistics was a man's game, a brutal world of heavy cargo and rough roads where a young girl would be crushed within weeks. But they didn't realize that when you have nothing to lose, your determination becomes a dangerous weapon. The beginnings were far from glamorous. With my last $300, I paid for a basic business registration and a subscription to a commercial freight load board. My headquarters was the corner of a freezing basement apartment. In heavy logistics, a broker acts as the vital link between massive factories that need to move industrial components and independent truckers looking for work. For the first 6 months, I worked 18-hour days, cold calling hundreds of shipping managers during the day and tracking independent drivers across time zones at night. The voice on the other end of the line was almost always skeptical. Truckers would openly mock my voice, asking to speak to the real boss or demanding to know how many rigs I actually owned. I had to learn to speak their language, cold, direct, and completely unyielding. I didn't take a single weekend off, reinvesting every single dollar of profit back into the business, living on instant noodles and pure adrenaline. The turning point came during a brutal winter storm. A massive manufacturing plant in the Midwest was facing a total production shutdown because their primary carrier had canceled a critical delivery of oversized steel valves. Every major logistics firm refused the job due to icy roads and high risks. I stayed up for 36 hours straight, calling every independent owner-operator in a 3-state radius until I found a veteran driver willing to take the hazard pay. I personally stayed on the phone with him every hour of the journey, navigating him through secondary roads to bypass the highway closures. When that cargo arrived at the factory gates, 2 hours ahead of schedule, saving the client millions of dollars, the manufacturing director called me directly. He didn't ask to speak to a male boss anymore. He gave me my first exclusive corporate contract. I had finally cracked the iron wall. With the first major corporate contract secured, the business shifted from an amateur hustle to a rapidly growing operation. But growth in the physical world of logistics requires physical assets, and that meant scaling the operation at a breakneck pace. I realized that to compete with the industry giants, I couldn't just remain a middleman. I needed to control the wheels. I used the profits from that first year to secure a lease on my first 3 heavy-duty trucks and hired my first full-time drivers. I didn't build an office in a shiny business center. I rented a small, gritty modular cabin right next to a major industrial highway junction where the air constantly smelled of diesel and asphalt. This phase of the business was an absolute test of mental and physical endurance. I was the CEO, the dispatcher, the accountant, and occasionally the mechanic. If a driver got sick or a rig broke down in the middle of the night, my phone would ring and I would be the one figuring out how to transfer 20 tons of industrial freight to a backup vehicle on the shoulder of a dark highway. I systematically studied the mechanics of the trucks, learning how to negotiate wholesale fuel contracts, understand axle weight regulations, and handle complex supply chain bottlenecks. The men who worked for me quickly stopped seeing a young woman. They saw a leader who was willing to stay up in the trenches. Alongside them, we gained a reputation for being the most reliable, unshakable carrier for high-value, heavy industrial cargo. By the end of the 3rd year, my small fleet of 3 trucks had expanded into a disciplined line of 50 assets, and our annual revenue crossed the 7-figure mark. As the company crossed into tens of millions in revenue, I realized that physical labor alone had its limits. To reach the absolute top of the global supply chain, I needed to automate the chaos. I took the ultimate corporate gamble. I invested a massive portion of our capital to develop a proprietary, encrypted, AI-driven dispatching and routing platform called Aegis Logistics. The software did what no human team could. It tracked global fuel prices, weather patterns, customs delays, and driver fatigue profiles in real time, matching cargo with the perfect vehicle with mathematical precision. We weren't just a trucking company anymore. We had transformed into a cutting-edge logistics tech enterprise, but the rapid evolution into a corporate behemoth came with a heavy psychological cost. The bigger the company grew, the more my life became detached from the real world. I moved out of the highway trailer and into a high-tech corporate headquarters, but the pressure only intensified. My old friends stopped calling, unable to relate to a woman whose daily routine involved managing multi-million-dollar asset risks and negotiating with global shipping cartels. Relationships crumbled before they could even start. My mind was permanently tethered to the digital grid of my company, tracking shipping containers across oceans and interstate networks 24 hours a day. I had achieved the financial security I had desperately craved when I started with $300, but I was realizing that the corporate ladder is a deeply isolating climb. I had built a flawless, high-performing machine, but to keep it running, I had to become as cold and efficient as the algorithms I created. The ultimate test of my empire didn't happen on icy highways or in technical servers. It occurred inside a soundproofed, luxury boardroom on the 50th floor of a corporate skyscraper. By our 8th year, Vertex Logistics was actively taking massive market share from the old, established logistics conglomerates that had dominated the industry for decades. They decided it was time to eliminate the disruption. A hostile consortium of legacy transport tycoons launched a coordinated, aggressive corporate squeeze against my company, buying up local fuel distribution networks, locking us out of major port terminals, and attempting to systematically poach my primary fleet drivers with inflated short-term bonuses. They thought they could scare me into a cheap buyout, treating me like an amateur who didn't belong at their table. But they forgot where I started. They had built their empires on generational wealth and corporate handshakes. I had built mine in the mud, grease, and freezing winter storms. I didn't back down. Instead of playing their defensive game, I used our proprietary AI platform to execute a brilliant cold counter strategy. I quietly bypassed the locked port terminals entirely, shifting our entire network to secondary inland dry ports that our software identified as highly optimized but underutilized. I offered my drivers long-term equity shares in the company, creating an unbreakable loyalty that no competitor's temporary bonus could buy, while the conglomerates were wasting millions trying to block our physical trucks. I launched an aggressive digital acquisition campaign, buying out their smaller, vital tech providers under their noses. After a brutal 6-month corporate war, the consortium's strategy collapsed under the weight of their own inefficiency. 2 of their largest member firms were forced to declare bankruptcy, and Vertex absorbed their assets, cementing our dominance over the market. Today, Vertex Holdings is an undisputed giant in global logistics, officially valued at over $100 million. We control thousands of automated transport units, move millions of tons of critical cargo across international borders every month, and our software dictates the efficiency of entire supply chains. I sit in a pristine, minimalist office at the very top of a glass and steel skyscraper, looking down at the city below. There are no rumbles of failing transmissions here, no smell of diesel fuel, no freezing drafts. It is a world of absolute, unshakable corporate victory. I achieved exactly what I set out to do with those last $300 in my pocket. But when I look at the reflection in the panoramic glass window, I don't see the young, passionate textile student or the frantic girl dispatching trucks from a dark basement. I see a formidable, cold, and flawless corporate monolith. The business is no longer something I own. It is a self-sustaining entity that requires my absolute, total dedication every single hour of the day. It is a clean, beautiful, gold-plated cage of my own creation. I have built the ultimate security, but I paid for it with my youth, my personal life, and the simplicity of my past. The story of my success isn't a fairy tale, and it isn't a crime thriller. It is a testament to the raw, transformative power of absolute ambition. The next time you think about starting a dream with nothing but a few dollars and your bare hands, remember that you will win, but the machine you build will eventually demand that you become its steel heart.